I believe I'm live, but this is only the second time I'm doing this, so I'm just going to double check. But in the meantime, welcome. There we go, it's good. Welcome everyone. In this video I just want to show as briefly as possible the general process of stitching an HDRI. I figure why not? I've got to stitch it anyway, so might as well live stream it, and if anybody is curious enough to see how it works, how it's done, then you're welcome to watch. So, okay, maybe we should start right at the beginning. What I do is I shoot lots of photos, right, in 360 degrees. There's normally, with the lens and the camera I've got, I shoot 29 different angles to capture the full 360 degrees. And that gives me, when I do exposure bracketing at the same time, so for example, these 6 images is one angle, and then I turn the camera, and then these 6 images is another angle. And I do that about 28 to 29 times, and we end up with about 168 photos. That's the shooting part. That normally takes 5 or 10 minutes to shoot, depending on how tricky it is to set up. If I have to test some exposure and things, it can take a lot longer, especially for nighttime stuff when the exposure time is longer and I need to do a lot of testing first. Anyway, but this particular one is just a room in a hotel in Venice. So there wasn't anything special. I probably went a little bit overboard on the exposures. I could have probably started here instead of at this darker one. But anyway, better safe than sorry. Sometimes there's little reflections that you need to expose for. So, once I've taken the photos, then I go into Adobe Lightroom and I convert the raw photos into TIFF files. And in the process of doing that, I fix the chromatic aberration and the lens distortion and the vignetting and all those things, and rotate the photos, obviously. So these are now 16-bit TIFFs, which are, it would be better if I could use EXR so that it has the complete dynamic range and data of the original raw files, but Lightroom just doesn't do that. And then I take these TIFF files and I use Blender to merge them into HDR files. So each of these sets, like this set of 6 photos, is merged into a single HDR. And what that does, I mean, you probably know all this already, but it combines it into a single image that has a very large dynamic range. This is probably the worst example, but you can increase the exposure and still get lots of detail in the shadows, and decrease the exposure and still get lots of detail in the highlights, like so. And now that we have the HDR file, these HDR files are quite large. They're not as big as the TIFFs, strangely enough, but 52 megs for a single image, and it takes a lot of data to process them. So what I prefer to do is convert all of these HDR files into JPEGs, tone map them, like that. And then I now have my tone mapped panorama, well, the different angles for the panorama. And then this is what I stitch with. So we go back into PTGui, which is the program I'm using to stitch the HDRIs. I've tried a couple other different things, but I don't know. This one seems to be the best. Like, there's a program called Hugin, which is very similar to PTGui, and it's free and open source as far as I know. But I've tried it several times, and it's just too slow, and it doesn't mesh with what I'm already used to in this program, which is why I've stuck to PTGui, which is about $180, I think, the last time I looked. But it's a once-off thing. You don't have to pay a subscription or anything like that. So, in PTGui, I bring in the JPEGs. There we go. And you just have to tell it what focal length and the crop factor, so it can figure it out. So then, we can basically click align images if we want to, but what it's going to do is it's going to look at all these different images and try and find different parts that match, and add control points. But what it's also going to do is if we go to some of these later ones where you can see the tripod and the panoramic head, you'll see in each of these photos the panoramic head is in the same place because that's what the camera is attached to. That's the thing that's rotating. So what I always do is I go and I zoom in a bit. And here we go. I paint it out. So PTGUI lets you mask out certain areas so that A, it won't consider them in the control point processing process, so that it doesn't try and look for control points in this masked out area, and then it also won't appear in the final image, the final panorama. So that's especially useful for crowd control, basically, by painting out people that are walking past, and then if there's another image at that's looking in the same direction, but that person's not there anymore, then it will fill in the gap. In this case, I can copy the mask and paste it there, paste it there, paste it there. There we go. Now this last image, number 27, maybe if I open it here. So you'll see the camera is in exactly the same place for the whole time. That's the whole point of the panoramic head. You can see it's just, you can see the tip of the carpet is hidden just underneath the tripod. So what I do for the very last image is I move the camera. There, I move the camera further back, like a meter or so, to capture the part of the ground that was underneath the tripod where you couldn't previously see. And then we just have to tell PTGUI that on this image the camera is actually moved, it's no longer in the same place, and we probably have to add a bunch of control points manually to tell it how the camera is moved. Anyway, in the last image where the camera is moved, we also don't want to see anything that is not actually the ground because the perspective has changed, and that just breaks things horribly. I mean, the reason I chose this HDRI to stream is because it's going to be the easiest one of the easiest ones I've ever done. There's no big open sky where I have to add control points or anything. There's no crowds moving past I have to mask out. Ideally, let me maybe save this first. Ideally, all I have to do is click Align Images and my job is mostly done. But there is one or two images where there's not a lot of details that it could grab onto with the control points. So I might have to do that manually. But at least it's only one or two. Yeah, okay, so it says it's analyzed the images, but it wasn't able to match all of them. And it wants us to add control points manually. Okay. Only image 9 doesn't have any control points. Image 9, I should zoom out a bit, I guess. Yeah, so image 9, you can see in the center part of the image where it looks to add control points, there's very little detail. There's one little thing over here that we could maybe do manually. And then in the corners there is a lot of stuff, but for some reason it doesn't like to look for control points in the corners, which is silly. Image 11 is also quite empty. Okay, so you can see even though image 10 and 11 are right next to each other, you can see the corner of the frame there. It hasn't found any control points because there's very little for it to grab onto. But let's just do number 9 first. We can see the corner of this bookshelf, I suppose. It doesn't have any books on it. About right. And maybe that thing? Can we see that thing? I can't see it in this one. So once you've added 2 control points manually, then it normally figures out what you're trying to do, and it will do the remaining ones. Yeah, it will find them automatically in the other image. So we should be able to Oh, interesting. Okay. So number 9, I should just leave these open. Whoa. There we go. So the first 8, we'll start at the beginning. The first 8, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6. No, man, that's not 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. Oh, I see 0 is the first one. So the first 9 shots are just level. The horizon is in the middle of the image. And then after that, I rotate the camera upwards and do the ceiling part. There's another 9 images there, and then we do downwards. So image number 9 is the 10th image, whatever, the first one that's facing up. That's why it hasn't found any control points, because this one is facing straight. Anyway, not really important, but that does mean we can go back to 0 and then find some control points here to match. There we go. I think the recommended number of control points is about minimum 4, definitely, and then 8 or 10 would be ideal, because it just needs to have a good idea of the distortion of the image and try and track it in a sort of 2D space, but it's kind of just 3D as well. I don't know. It's weird because it's spherical. I think that's we can do one on this side. I like to put them in corners or something that's an obvious matching point, as opposed to a line on the side. Because if you just stick it on a straight line like here, it's not necessarily on the same point on the line. So you gotta find some corners, like not like that, like that. There we go. That's about right. Okay, and supposedly that will do, but I think I should add one to add some pairs between number 9 and number 10. Cool. So, supposedly, we have enough control points, but it does say we have misaligned control points, which means in the table here, some of them have quite a large error. Yeah, so what the error means in this table, the distance, is the distance between where it thinks it should be and where it's found a match. So in this case, this point it's thinking there's 25 pixels away from where it should be, and you can see it's on one of these straight lines where everything just looks the same. So what we just got to do is delete it. And it's probably the same for this one. Yeah, number 14 is just in the middle of a door. But before we do that, I'm just going to align it again so we can get that 9th image attached to something. And then we can start deleting the broken control points. I'm just going to check the chat real quick. Ah, there are people watching me. It's amazing. Okay. Alex is asking, how do I do that in Blender? I assume that's referring to merging the exposure brackets. And that's a good question, because it's something that I spent quite a long time figuring out. There's a lot of software out there that takes your exposure brackets straight from the camera and creates an HDR out of them. But in my experience, that software it's made to work for everybody with all cameras and all yeah, basically it's made to work for everything. Whereas in my case, I always know exactly what I want to do. The exposure is always very similar, and I want to make sure that mathematically they're getting merged together properly. Because what a lot of the software will do is it'll look at the metadata in the image and see the shutter speeds and things, and it will use that to merge the different exposures together. But then what it also does is it will look at the overall brightness of the image itself and adjust the merging process to try and make it look right by increasing or decreasing the exposure. And that is not mathematically correct, which results in your HDR, like the light, if they are really intense lights. Let me show you an example, actually. This is really difficult to explain. This one, yeah, this will do. So for example, where's that window? Okay, so this image is basically black except for a little bit of light areas over here outside the window. And what some of that software will do is it will look at like the average brightness of the image and think, wait a minute, that's like way too dark. And this one is also very similar in average brightness, and it will try and compensate for the brightness of the image itself and not just the metadata where we know how bright it is already. Anyway, I've probably explained that terribly, but what I do in Blender is I take those these TIFF files, wherever they are, and then I will increase the exposure of this one by 2 stops. So I'll look at all the metadata, which is in the properties. So the brightest one is got a 2-second exposure, and the next brightest one has got a half-second exposure. So that's 2 stops, from 2 seconds to 1 second to half a second. And then the script that I have in Blender will say, okay, there's a 2-stop difference, then increase the brightness of this image by 2 stops, and then use the best parts of all the images, basically. And I figured it out once in the compositor, and I've just made a script that does everything automatically, which is great. But at some point I'm going to release these tools, and other people will be able to use those scripts to make more mathematically accurate HDRIs, which results in more realistic lighting, basically. So, yeah, Strufel, I'm using the pro version of PTGUI, just because I think the standard one can't do some important things to do with HDRI making. I can't remember. I bought it quite a while ago. Okay. Then we've successfully stitched our panorama, but if we go and look at the panorama editor, you can see, first of all, things aren't level. Like this line over here is not straight, and then there's a bunch of seams. And what those are caused by is basically bad control points. So in this case, these distances here are humongous and obviously incorrect. So it's found a control point here that matches something here visually. But if we look really closely, we can see these are actually 2 completely separate tiles on the floor. And so it's completely wrong. So we can just delete that guy. And what I normally do is I just go through this list and I delete the worst ones. If there's an image where it's like there's only 4 or 5 control points there already and I have to delete one of them, then I'll add one as well. Jeez, okay, these tiles. It is really struggling with those tiles. And once I've done a few, then I'll go to the optimizer and optimize it again. So the other thing I do is I set the lens distortion and stuff to heavy with the lens shift, and then that just helps it fine-tune everything together and get rid of some of the scenes. And as I mentioned earlier, with the very last image being of the control points, hang on, let me just go to something that on my other screen that's not flashing. There you are. So the last image is where the camera was moved out the way so I can shoot the floor where the tripod used to be. Because the camera was actually moved, we have to tell it that it moved, and then it's going to try and optimize the stitching to account for that. So we can click optimize, and it's going to tell us we have a very good optimization, and then it updates all the distances in the control point table, and we can keep doing this. There is an option to do it automatically. I think delete worst control points, and then that will remove, like, statistically the worst distances, but I prefer not to do that when there's because sometimes you actually want to see what the problem is, and as I said earlier, if there's one pair of images that has only a couple control points, then you want to remove the bad ones and re-add some good ones manually. Very slow. That's fine. So I delete all of them down to about 5 pixels with the distance, and then it's a good idea to optimize it every now and then, because sometimes it will reduce the distances. I'm not sure how it calculates that, but it's sort of to do with the average of all of them. Cool. Just give me 1 second. Somebody's arrived home. Don't want to be disturbed in my important YouTube live streaming session. Anyway, so there we go. We're down to a distance of about 5 pixels. This is probably fine, but we can do one more. There we go. So now we go back and optimize, now that we've deleted the control points, and we can see we've got very good. And what that means is if we go back to the panorama editor, the level is still not perfectly correct, but now we don't see any seams on the straight lines, which is cool. So then what we do, if we want to correct the horizon level, we can just drag this thing around and try and make it straight. That's obviously the wrong thing to do. But if you really try and tweak it, you can get it eventually correct. But it's a pretty weird way to control it. The easiest thing to do is just to go to the control point editor and then find an image that has a nice straight line that you trust, like a door frame or something. Those are usually pretty good. Though in Venice, where everything is not straight, you never know. So I'm gonna trust that this door frame is straight, and then you select the same image on both sides, and then that'll let you add a control point on the one side and a control point on the other side to tell it where there is a straight line. And at the bottom here, you can see it says this is a vertical line. And then you do that for a couple of the different places, like so. Just a few of the images, preferably all the way around, or at least on 2 sides, 2 or 3 sides, just to give it the best chance of figuring out the horizon. Okay, that'll probably be fine. Then we can go back to the optimizer, run optimization, and now it is pretty much level. That looks good to me. Just checking the chat again. Cool. So this is basically the panorama itself is stitched. The next thing I'll do is go and preview it at about 12,000 pixels. And this is going to stitch the panorama as it is now using the tone mapped JPEG images. And if we can confirm that there's no seams or no issues or anything like that, then we can go ahead and stitch the actual HDR itself. So this part, sometimes I go too quickly and I'll miss a few seams. But, okay. There's one interesting seam up here. It's very slight. It's probably not going to be that easy to fix. but I think overall it's pretty good. And now you can also check how it's filled in the bottom of the where the tripod used to be based on that last image. Oh, that's actually a really good point. We didn't even look at that. So the last image, what has it found? Okay, it's found some control points on the tiles. That's amazing. Normally, because the viewpoint is so shifted, it doesn't ever find anything, and you have to manually go and click on a bunch of points. And that's actually one of the slowest parts of making an HDRI, is filling in the gap where the tripod used to be, which probably nobody ever looks at. Anyway, that worked pretty flawlessly all by itself. We got lucky. So let's see if we can try and fix that seam up there. And there's two ways. The first thing we can do is just find out which images those are, which will be in the panorama editor. So it's probably, okay, it's the seam between image 8 and image 17, I think. That looks about right. So if we just check image 8 and image 17, yeah, there's no control points. It hasn't even looked. So all we have to do is add a couple control points and re-optimize it. Is that really in the same place? No. So because it uses a kind of average position based on all the control points, we're going to want to add quite a few here. Otherwise, the other images that it's got control points for will just outweigh it based on the fact that they've got more control points, which may not be as well aligned as this one. So the other point is that sometimes the software is a lot better at finding the exact matching point for the control point as I am. I might be a pixel or two off. Anyway, that looks about right. We can just add one more up there. What the heck? That's not at all the right place. Okay. Maybe computers are just dumb. So, now we should optimize it again, and hopefully that seam will disappear. We'll have to preview it again. Close this one. Okay. And hopefully that doesn't break anything else. There's still a seam there. But I might be willing to live with that. The other thing we can do to hide seams is, okay, there's two things. Firstly, we can tell it in the masking thing, we can say, okay, on this image, we're going to make a green area where it has to use this part of this image. We're forcing it to use this entire area, which means we won't notice the seam here. The seam might appear somewhere else, like in the middle of this area here, but it's less noticeable because it's not on a straight line. The other thing we can do is fiddle with the feathering, whether it's a sharp seam or a soft seam. But that affects the entire panorama, and then we're going to have to check for seams all over again. And if your seams are too soft, then it can make like areas of less detail. So we're just going to try by putting the mask on that image and previewing it again. There we go. And that looks pretty good to me. I don't even know where it went. So it might be somewhere in this wooden area here, but because there's no straight lines, we can't see it. And that's done. Oh, great. There's another one over there. we can just do the same thing. Where is it? This one. So we'll just put a little line here, and hopefully that will fix it. Of course, it might just move the seam somewhere else, in which case we could just paint it out in Photoshop later. Is that a seam? I'm not sure. No, it's not. That's just how it is. Cool. Very strange. Okay, so now that we've got rid of all of the seams, hopefully, looks good to me. We might find something later, but we can just paint it out. We can save our project, and then what you can do is save a template project, which will, like, it'll keep the positioning of the control points for each image relative to each other, and then you can open different batch of images, like instead of the JPEG ones we've just stitched, but the HDRs, and then apply the template to that project. Or you can go to the project file itself and open it in Notepad or something. So this is this file in Notepad, and if we go down here, you can see we can just search for JPEG or .jpeg, and then it's going to find this is where it's loading in the image file, and then all you have to do is replace this with with the correct path to the HDR file, and then you're done. And I've made a script to do pretty much just that, to swap the JPEGs to the HDR, and then we can just open that back up again, and that will load in the HDR files. Very slowly, because they're quite big. Or maybe, there we go. Yeah, it's very slow. So where is that thing gone? Okay, computer's getting very slow now because it's loading everything. And then all we have to do is just the exposure. We can just make a best guess. Try and make a best guess. And then tweak that in a bit. Let's try 3 stops. That's probably not enough. That'll probably be fine. Then we make it 16,000 pixels, 16384 by 8192. Those are all multiples of 1024, or powers of 2, which for some reason computers like, or apparently computers like them, but nobody seems to be able to explain why. And then set it to only output the HDR file. We don't want to tone map anything. And then we're done. Let's just save the project, create panorama. We're not actually done, we're almost done. So we will have an HDR file now. Once this is done, it will appear next to the project file. It's busy saving it here. Once we got the HDR file, then what I like to do is adjust the exposure of it, just to get it nicely exposed when you bring it into Blender or whatever program you use, so you don't have to change the strength of the environment every time you change an HDRI. It should be reasonably exposed the first time, and also rotate it so that it looks nice. When there's a sun or some intense light source, I normally try to make it in the same position each time so that the lighting is consistent. If you swap out different HDRIs, coming from the same consistent direction anyway for different HDRIs. In this case, I guess the doorway here is probably the main light source, so I can position that there. But if there's not a main light source, then I just try and make it look pretty. So, okay, it's done. So let's do that. This is my little go-to scene for checking an HDRI's exposure and rotation. And if it looks nice, then we're almost done. Then we just have to publish it and render all the previews and stuff. Okay, it's a little bit dark. So what we're going to do first is open it in Photoshop and get the rotation correct. And then we can adjust the exposure for the correct rotation. It's loading. Okay. So I always put a guide at 60%, like that, and then rotate it so that the middle of the light is in the middle of the guide. And to do that, we just unlock that, duplicate the layer, and to rotate the HDRI, pro tip, all we have to do is move it horizontally, like that. It's amazing. And then move the other side so that it snaps in place. And voila, there's no seam. Okay, and now that we have both of these right next to each other, we can just do this and move it around. But we're not going to do that. Undo. Photoshop. Okay, that looks about right. Then we save it again as an HDR, and we wait some more. There's going to be a lot of waiting from now on in the stream, so this is not the most interesting part. It just takes time. Okay, is it saved? Yes, I think it's saved. We're not going to close that just yet. So now Blender should reload the file anyway, like it always does. And then that should have the correct rotation, which is normally coming just from the right side in the scene anyway. Yeah. Now that we have the correct rotation, we can tweak the exposure. That's about right. So we need to increase it by half a stop. So this node is just a group that sets the strength of the background shader to 2 to the power of whatever the input is, which is an EV or a stop. So in photography or anything, 1 EV is double the amount of light. So in this case, 0.5, 2 to the power of 0.5 is, I don't know, 0 point something. It's maths. So half a stop brighter. We go back to our Photoshop scene, add an exposure layer, make it half a stop brighter. Subtle, but makes a difference. And then we'll save that. Again. Okay. We're done here. We're done with PT GUI. Hey. Now we're just waiting for Photoshop to save. It won't let me move the progress bar. Oh, there we go. So basically this HDR file we have now is the final thing. This one here. Now we just need to basically upload it to the website and render all the previews and things. If we go to the website, HDRIhaven.com, so we need to render the sphere image, the spheres thing, scene, and then we also need to create various resolutions of thumbnails and tone mapped things. Like this thumbnail here, and this size thumbnail here, and the size sphere preview thing, and then all of the, I don't know if you've ever noticed these buttons up here, but they do things. The exposure previews, we've got to render these things as well, which it lets you preview the dynamic range. And then there's also the panorama itself, the panorama preview. We've got to render this as well. And all of these things individually are fairly time-consuming processes, but over the years I have slowly managed to combine it into 1 or 2 scripts. So the first thing to do is take this file, which is 16,000 pixels wide, and make various resolutions of it. So I've got a script that uses ImageMagick, which is a command line processing tool They've got a HDR compiled version you can download on the website, which can handle HDR files. And then I've made a script that will run that and make 8K, 4K, 2K, 1K, 512p, and down to 256p. And then rename the original file to 16K. So this doesn't normally take that long. It should, in theory, be using the, once it's resized it to the 8K, then it uses that 8K to resize to the 4K, and then it uses the 4K to resize to 2K, and then it's supposed to speed up eventually, but yeah. Okay. In the chat, somebody who has a long, unpronounceable name, I'm very sorry, has asked, but TIFF, or has said, but TIFF already supports up to 32-bit colors. That is true, supposedly, but I don't understand color management, and there's a difference between like storing 32 bits of color and storing unclamped 32 bits of color with no maximum. So how I understand it, TIFF has a maximum color value, which is, I'm not sure if it's 255 or 1.0 like a low dynamic range JPEG or PNG, but it's definitely not the full 32-bit thing. Actually, I'm probably talking crap. That's not true. The reason I don't use 32-bit TIFF is because Lightroom can't export 32-bit TIFF. It only does 16-bit, which is the clamped thing, which is like not the full dynamic range. Anyway, so okay, no more questions it seems. So now that we have all the various resolutions, I can start uploading it. Actually, that's a bad idea if I'm streaming. So normally I'll start uploading this to the server so long, now that I have all the files. And then what I'll do is I'll render all the previews. And the previews, what I mean is all those thumbnails and the sphere images and things like that, the sphere scenes. And to do that, I just say, make previews. And there's a magic script that does all of my work for me. So first of all, it uses a program called, I think it's Luminance HDR, which comes with a command line tool for tone mapping. And what tone mapping is, it's basically taking the full dynamic range HDR file and compressing that dynamic range into like a JPEG or an 8-bit image by like darkening the bright parts dynamically, locally, I think. So for each area of the image, each like section, it tries to make it look nice. And that's the difference between basically this image, this is tone mapped, and this is what the raw HDR would look like. So it's all these hugely bright areas, it's darkening them a bit so we can see the detail. And it's the same for shadows and things as well. It just makes it look nice. Sometimes I don't actually use it, sometimes I just tone map it in Photoshop instead because it's got a different algorithm that might be better. But we'll have to see how it looks first. We might as well start opening this in Photoshop. Or maybe not. Everything is slow when you're dealing with 16,000 pixels. When I ever upgrade my camera and start doing even higher resolution stuff, it's gonna be painful. I'm gonna have to upgrade my computer as well. At the moment, I've got a pretty old CPU. I think it's like 5 or 6 years old now. Yeah, it's i7 2600K. That was like my first computer upgrade after getting my first job. It's old now. And I got 28 gigs of RAM. I used to have 32, but one of them broke. And I got a 980 Ti graphics card, which does most of the hard work of stitching HDRIs, which is great. That's another reason why I use PTGUI and not Huggin or AutoPano or I think Microsoft has something. I don't think those ones can use your GPU, and then everything's just slow. So it is still still tone mapping, apparently. I'm not quite sure if I believe it. What is going on? Task manager, that's all I wanted. Is it only using one core? Is it doing anything? I don't think it is. I think it's broken. Okay, let's try this again. Oh, actually, forget about the tone mapping thing. Let's just tone map it in Photoshop. Hey, Rico. Nice to see you. So if anybody's they didn't make it to the beginning of the stream, I'm gonna leave this recording online for a couple of days or something. It'll maybe be unlisted or something, but you can just watch it at the same URL you're at now. So in Photoshop, it's a 32-bit image currently. Once we open the HDR file, but we can change it to 8-bit, and then it's going to ask us in a window off screen to choose our tone mapping method. And local adaptation is quite good, but the defaults are really crap. Actually, wow, this looks terrible. Let's try highlight compression. Okay, highlight compression is very similar to the algorithm I use in the script, which is, I think it's called Reinhardt. Anyway, so all this does is it compresses the highlights. It doesn't try and do any local brightness adjustments apart from highlight compression, which is probably not even a local thing. Anyway, so once we've done that, we can just see a bit of detail out the window, which is good. Then it's at this point, once we're like almost finished, where I start noticing things like, is it actually level? Or is my brain just, I mean, this lamp is probably not standing up straight. I think it's level. The doors are level, that's for sure. I don't know. I think it's fine. Anyway, now that we've tone mapped it, I normally just do a couple of these sharpening things to make it look pretty. First of all, we do a simple S-curve, which gives us a little bit of nice contrast and saturation. That's probably fine. Merge everything, and then sharpening. Okay, let's first save this image in the right place, and then the action will probably work. Actually, it doesn't matter. We can save it later. So I've just got an action set up that does an unsharp mask with a pretty large radius, which gives us some nice overall clarity, it's normally called. Or what else do they call it? I think it's normally clarity, where it sort of defines edges better, but it's not quite like detail sharpening. It's more like overall sharpening. And then it does a smart sharpen just for detail sharpening, and then it saves it out to the right location. I think it does. It probably just asks me where to save it, and I think I can remember where to save it, but I'm not sure. And then once that file exists, we can do my little script again, and it will skip that part. Rico is asking how long it takes me to process one HDRI. Well, in this case, the stream has been running for 45 minutes and we're almost done. But this case is one of the easiest HDRIs I've ever stitched. It was pretty much no manual work to be done. Let me just start saving this in the right location because it takes forever. Oh boy. I don't remember what it's supposed to be called. So I'm just going to open my script here. So this is the script I use for, this is what makes all the sphere images and the tone mapping and stuff. What is the file name? C temp T HDRI. Yeah. So temp T, and then it's called reading room.png. I think that's right. Is it not another underscore or something? No. Cool. So, very important dialogue here is when you're saving a PNG that is 16,000 pixels wide and 8,000 pixels tall, is which of these compression options you should choose. Definitely the largest file size. And I know that sounds like a terrible idea, but the reason is the saving time. If you tell it to use the smallest file size and the slowest saving, you're going to be sitting here for a couple hours. It's stupidly slow. If you choose the largest file size, the file itself will be like 500 and something megs, but it's going to take still a long time, but relatively a lot shorter. Let me move it. There we go. And it's almost done. Cool. So now that that file is there, I can go back to this guy. Doesn't matter which one I click on. Make previews, and now you see it's skipping the tone mapping because we've already done it. And now it's building the panelum, which is some open source. I believe it's open source. It might not be. Some software for doing that 360-degree preview thing, which I suspect nobody ever uses, but it's cool anyway. Then that takes a while, and it says could be a decompression bomb DOS attack because the image size is more than 134. Oh no, it is 134 million pixels. So it thinks somebody is trying to kill my computer by doing a decompression bomb because the image is so large, which is fun. To get back to Rico's question about how long it normally takes me to do an HDRI to process it, it depends entirely on how much work there is to do. So this one, it'll probably be like an hour or so, which is about as quick as it gets. And then if it is something like, let's find the worst example, or the longest example, will be one of the nighttime ones. Where are they? This one. So the nighttime ones, the problem with these is the noise. You can see at the bottom there's a lot of grain, and the stars themselves all look very similar. So basically the software is incapable of adding control points automatically, and then you have to go through every single image multiple times, adding control points to each of them. So like control points between image 1 and 2, control points between image 2 and 3, control points between 1 and 3, and so on. And that takes a really long time, and your human capabilities of getting them perfectly aligned is not really good. So you have to be extra careful, and there's going to be seams, and you're going to have to go back and delete control points and add new ones, and all the stars look the same. This was a nightmare to stitch. There are a couple other ones. For example, this one. Rico, you'll know what I mean with this one. In Venice, me and Rico were here shooting the HDRI at, what was it, 7:30 in the morning. So not early, because it was almost winter. The sun came up quite late, or late-ish, meaning there were tourists everywhere, and I have to mask out tourists and other people taking photos. This part back here where you can see people, it was about this density of people, but pretty much all around us, which meant I had to take a lot of extra photos and then mask out all the people walking past. And then in some cases, like over here, there was always somebody there, and I couldn't actually mask them out because then there would be a big black hole in the HDRI, so they just have to stay, and that sort of thing. And this one actually, because it took so long to capture, because of all the tourists running around, the reflection of the sun wasn't lined up with the sun itself, because the sun had moved as it was rising when I captured this part here, but when I captured the sun, which I do separately because it's really bright, it had moved a little bit, so I had to move the sun. Anyway, so the more fixing up there is to do, the longer it takes, and this pretty much took the entire day to stitch, just because of all the people and extra things you have to do. Okay, so what my script is doing now, it's finished doing the panorama, the 360-degree preview thing, this thing, and now it is rendering those sphere images using Blender, of course. And I use cycles, obviously, and I use Filmic because Filmic is what everybody should be using. It's just, I don't see there's no reason why you shouldn't, and it basically just gives you a much more realistic representation of lighting. The difference, I wonder if I still have those files somewhere. Probably not. Filmic test, that's got to mean something. Okay, so in this case, where the sun is quite low and it's quite colored, but it's quite bright as well, this is without Filmic color management. So it's way overblown over here. There's a really bright spot, and the colors are way too saturated, and the fall off of the light just looks wrong, like it's computer graphics. Whereas with the Filmic color management, it looks a lot more realistic, how your eyes or how cameras would perceive it in real life. Another example, this one, where it's not the colors that are the problem, but just the intensity. You can see the intensity of the sun here is way too bright, and the fall off is really unrealistic. Whereas compared to with Filmic color management, it looks a lot more realistic. In more real life cases, it makes, where are we? It's you can see this is without Filmic. You can see it's overblown here, overexposed, and the colors look way too saturated and just ugly. But then, yeah, so basically Filmic is what you want to be using for everything from now on. Or from about last year onwards. How is this going? We're on the second tile, about halfway through, which means it's nearly done. Yeah, it shouldn't take long. Then once that has finished, we will go to all the website files itself, which at some point I'd like to publish, but I'm not a web developer and I'm embarrassed about my crappy code, so that's not going to be happening anytime soon. Once that's finished, we can commit it to the website and then publish it, except we're not going to publish it right now because I still have to upload it. Maybe I can upload it now. I'm not sure how the stream is going to handle it though. So I basically just upload everything to Google Drive because it's fast. For me, Google Drive seems to use the full internet speed that I've got, whereas things like FTP or Dropbox or anything like that, it's capped at some stupidly low speed, like 2 megabits a second. So we'd be here all day. So if the stream starts getting really low quality, it's because I'm uploading the HDRIs as we speak. Just let me know in the chat if that happens. The script is finished, which means we've got all of our thumbnails and things, and we can commit those to the website, which is also going to upload and make the stream really slow. I use Git out of no particular reason other than it makes my life easier. It's not the most efficient solution to adding large binary files to websites, but these aren't particularly large binary files. They're just JPEGs, or the files for the website. The HDRIs themselves go through Google Drive. So I just search for TIFF because sometimes if something goes wrong, there'll be a TIFF hidden in here, and then that's gonna, other than things just breaking, it's gonna take forever to upload. Now that we've committed it, we can push it to the repository online, and then we need a pull from the website. This might take a while. This is my internet at the moment. It's struggling. This was just streaming the video using about 4 megabits, and now it's streaming the video and uploading the HDRIs and uploading the website files. So if things are still working smoothly on YouTube, then I'm pretty amazed. we're just going to wait here patiently because we have nothing else to do and we can't move forward until this is done. If you have any questions or anything to keep me entertained for the next 5 minutes while I try and, I don't know, talk to the camera, that would be appreciated. We could talk about what's coming up on the website. The Trello board. So if you support me on Patreon, where is Patreon? You will hopefully know that there is an instructions button here to go to the posts with all the instructions. And all of my patrons have access to a Trello board, but just by clicking that link. That will take you to this board where you can see all of the HDRIs that I'm busy working on, like this one, and all the ones that are upcoming, and all of the ideas that I've had and other people have had of where I could possibly shoot something. Let me just move this here so I can keep an eye on it. And what kind of HDRIs people might want. It seems like interior spaces are well requested, and photo studios. I've been in contact with someone who has a photo studio, and I'm trying to set up doing some HDRIs there. It's just a little bit slow because photographers are busy people, and this is super weird, and they don't really know what to do with me because I don't really want to hire them as a photographer. I want to hire them because they have lights and a studio space and experience with setting up those lights. Anyway, so eventually, sometime in the next, hopefully a month or 2 or 3, we'll get some photo studio HDRIs just as a test, and if people like those, then I will spend spend a little bit more money renting a bigger studio with bigger lights and things like that, and we can get some more of them. Interior spaces, okay, large interior spaces, I assume things like warehouses and industrial places, those are hard to find because they are normally occupied, either by people who own the buildings or people who don't own the buildings and just live there or do drugs or something. So those will happen eventually. It's just a matter of finding these places or finding people who know of these places that I could go to. Just interior stuff in general is the reason there's not that much of it at the moment is because you have to get permission from the owners to shoot there, and there's only so many hotels I can go to, like hotel rooms where I'm traveling. I shoot those quite often, as I'm sure you know, but yeah, I just need to contact some people, send out random emails on the internet and see who's willing to let me take photos of their house for free. I guess I could pay them. I don't know. I've thought about contacting some hotels and offering like a web, what do you call it? A virtual reality tour service. You might have seen like online some hotels and things that let you see a 360-degree preview of their hotel rooms or their lobby or something like that. So if I could offer to do that for hotels for free in exchange for using those same panoramas for myself, for HDRI Haven, I think that could work. But it's just a matter of doing it. And I'm pretty busy at the moment. Otherwise, outdoor stuff is always fun. I like hiking, so that's why there's so much outdoor good weather HDRIs. Okay, so now that we've actually uploaded everything, is everything uploaded? Yes, it is. Okay, even Google Drive is uploaded. So now, we don't need this. We need this guy. I have another script that connects to the server and tells it to update all the HDRIs from Google Drive and from Git, which is all the previews. This doesn't always take very long, but sometimes it does for unknown reasons. Anyway, while that's running, we can go to this page, this mysterious page. which is password protected. So if you try and go here, it's not actually going to work. So this is what I use to actually add the HDRI to the website with the database and everything. We need to go to the original photos. So on the website, each HDRI has dynamic range, which is calculated based off the minimum exposure and the maximum exposure. It's got a white balance, which is normally 5400, just because I like to be consistent about that. Otherwise, like an orange light will just look white and then you get no variation in your HDRIs. But sometimes I change it for nighttime stuff. And in those cases, you want to know what I've changed it to. And also I want to know what I've changed it to in case they are backplates. And then I want to set the backplates to the same white balance so they look correct. And then just for informational purposes, when it was taken, at what time, in case somebody needs to know exactly. When it was published, which is automatic, categories so that they show up when you look on the sidebar, or obviously in here, or on the sidebar here. These are all the categories. And then tags for searching, and then the number of downloads is automatic as well. So, wow, 1,200 downloads. Wasn't this like a week ago? Jeez, things are growing, people. Seems like it's still uploading itself, but anyway, we can do this thing so long. What I normally do, in this case, there's no sun or anything like that, so all of the images are in a single folder, and I can just go to the properties of the darkest image and the lightest image and compare them here. So they were taken, this thing was taken on the 2nd of November 2017. So 2017, 11:02 at 14:27. So obviously I don't take an HDRI in one instant. You can see that the first image was taken at 14:27 and the last image was taken at 14:32. So that was 5 minutes to actually shoot the thing. But I've got to put a single number in here, so it's normally the first one. The time zone offset, in this case, I don't set the time zone on my camera at all. So the time that the camera records will be different from the actual local time that the photo was taken. So I add a time zone offset. In this case, it was -1. The camera is set to my local South African time zone, which is GMT +2. And Italy at the time of taking this photo was GMT +1, which is why there's the -1 offset. Anyway, then the darkest, I'm just going to put these here. You don't really need to see them, but I do. The darkest shot, the shutter speed was 1/500th. The aperture was f11, the ISO was 100, and there was no ND filters. The brightest shot was 2 seconds with the same other exposure settings. The white balance is always 5400. But I do have a script to check that, except I didn't change it, so it'll be the same. Now coordinates, I keep here. I don't actually show them on the website yet. Just because I haven't done it yet. I don't know if people want to see this, but if they do, it is available for a lot of them. And I can make a little link to Google Maps or something. So categories, we can do this is easier to do when we can actually see the HDRI. And I'm waiting for the website to finish transferring all the files. It's already transferred the HDR files itself. Now it's just checking all the other folders, like the backplates and the other things like that. Once it's finished that, then it will actually do the git pull, which will bring us all the thumbnails so we can see them on this website, which will help us select the categories and the tags and things at the same time. The reason I made this interface instead of just adding it manually on the website is A, because it's easier for me, and B, because at some point I'm thinking about letting other people upload HDRIs to HDRI Haven. But that is, it's an idea, it's not a set in stone thing. If it were to happen, it would have to be a lot of quality control to maintain the same consistent resolution and sharpness and dynamic range and things like that. And obviously I would pay these people, I would split the Patreon income fairly, but it's just, it would be extra work for me to set that up and to moderate it and help people capture HDRIs at that quality. Because it's all these little scripts that I've got that not just make my life easier, but actually do important things, like making sure that the dynamic range is correct and unclipped and things like that. Is this done yet? Yes, it's done. Okay. So now we can set the name, which will be reading room. And once we select update that, it'll load in the image. And now it'll help us say, okay, this is indoor, urban. The time of day is not really relevant, but we can say afternoon. The weather is not relevant. I would call this medium contrast. I don't really have any like strict sense of what is high contrast, medium contrast, or low contrast, but low contrast is generally saved for things like overcast skies where there's no directional light at all, and high contrast is for whether there's a really strong directional light with strong shadows like the sun, or just really small light sources that are high contrast. In this case, medium contrast will do, and it's natural light. Tags. Okay. If you have any suggestions for tags, let me know. I was thinking about making like a section here to let people add tags publicly, but it's really not that important. This is just for searching for stuff, to help people find it. If they search for like, I want a chair, then they type in chair in the search engine, and then it finds an HDRI that has a chair in it. Anyway, the search engine, by the way, if you've never noticed, is over here. There's a search bar. We can say chair, and then we'll find an HDRI that has chairs in it. It's amazing. Except it's dependent on the fact that I have to manually type in tags, which is just painful. Maybe I should look into some libraries that do better jobs of this. Okay. Europe. It's not really European specifically. I mean, it's in Europe, but this HDRI doesn't say Europe. So, window, door, tile. I think that's about it. These are all the previously used tags that I've ever used, sorted by frequency. So the big ones at the top are more often used than the small ones at the bottom. I think that's all for now. It's not really important. Yeah. Okay. Then we can just say when to publish immediately. Does it have backplates? Nope. And we're done. Click the big button. Shows us some SQL stuff for debugging, and success. View this HDRI, and it's up. Magic. So if you go to this URL here, you'll be able to see it and download it. Everything's working. I can just paste that in the chat if anybody is watching at all, and then we're done. It's not going to show up immediately on these pages here because all of these pages are cached, just to save my server some processing time and bandwidth and things, but in an hour or two it'll show up. Otherwise, that is all. We are finished. I've just got to post this on Facebook and Twitter and stuff, and then I'm done. 0 downloads. Who's going to be the first one? You've probably done it already. Anyway, maybe I can do it. Haha! So, thank you everybody for watching. I'm finished now. That was a grand total of 1 hour and 34 seconds. Not bad. Quicker than I thought. Somebody says the link doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. It should. Why doesn't it work? I copied it straight from the URL. Interesting. Maybe it's also cached. Let me try and clear that real quick. Okay, I'm finished now. Thank you for watching again. You can stop watching me babble about random crap and actually go and do something with your Saturday. Goodbye. You can watch me click around on the screen for a while because I have to do this. But otherwise, this is the end. Cool. Does the link work now? It doesn't. How annoying. I'm sure it's just a caching thing. It'll fix itself. That was tiring. The big red button. Are you ready? Am I ready? 13 total people saw this video. Thank you very much. I'm sure it was probably the least interesting part of your Saturday, but goodbye all the same. Oh, I have to click this as well. Okay. Goodbye again for like the 10th